This episode begins by slowing down a belief so common it usually passes without inspection. The belief is that buying a house is the natural first step into adulthood, stability, and responsibility. It is presented as progress, celebrated by family, rewarded by institutions, and reinforced by culture. The episode does not mock this belief or reject it outright. Instead, it asks a quieter and more uncomfortable question. What happens when that decision is made early, without leverage and under pressure, while the stated goal is long-term independence? The episode explains that most people do not buy homes from a position of excess or strategic advantage. They buy the maximum obligation a bank is willing to approve. This is not framed as stupidity or ignorance. It is framed as a predictable outcome of how modern lending systems are designed. Banks are rewarded for long repayment timelines and consistent monthly compliance. They are not rewarded for borrower flexibility, mobility, or future optionality. When someone accepts that loan, capital that could have remained adaptive becomes fixed, while the obligation remains portable. The house stays in one place, the payment follows everywhere. From there, the episode challenges one of the most commonly repeated justifications for early ownership, the idea that a mortgage is the same as rent. It explains that this comparison only works if ownership is reduced to a single monthly number. Rent is a known quantity with a defined term. Ownership is a system that reveals its full cost only after commitment. Repairs do not announce themselves in advance. Maintenance is not optional. Taxes rise independently of income. Renovations evolve from choices into expectations. None of this is presented as rare or exceptional. The episode makes clear that these are not edge cases. They are the baseline conditions of ownership. By removing emotion from the comparison, the episode reframes the conversation as one about leverage rather than lifestyle. It asks, what happens when fixed costs rise faster than flexibility? It asks, what happens to decision-making when every choice must be filtered through an existing obligation? It suggests that stability, when achieved too early and without margin, does not expand possibility. It narrows it. The episode then shifts attention away from buildings entirely and toward timing. It argues that ownership itself is not the problem. Timing is. A house purchased from surplus behaves differently than a house purchased from necessity. A house purchased from leverage can be shelter. A house purchased from pressure becomes an anchor. The episode emphasizes that confusing adulthood with readiness is one of the most common financial mistakes people make, not because they are careless, but because the transition is socially rewarded regardless of individual context. At this point, the episode begins to separate comfort from control. It explains that comfort is immediately felt, while control is quietly lost. Comfort provides reassurance in the present. Control determines options in the future. The episode suggests that many people choose comfort because it is visible and praised, while control is abstract and rarely acknowledged. Over time, this trade becomes invisible. What was once a choice hardens into routine. Routine becomes identity. The episode introduces flexibility as an overlooked form of wealth. Flexibility is described not as instability, but as responsiveness, the ability to move for opportunity, the ability to leave environments that no longer work, the ability to pause without panic. The episode argues that debt does not simply alter finances, it alters psychology. It changes how risk is perceived. It turns change into guilt. It reframes possibility as irresponsibility. These shifts do not happen overnight. They happen gradually, which is why they are rarely noticed. Rather than condemning this outcome, the episode normalizes it. It acknowledges that people are not misled by villains or conspiracies. They are guided by incentives and applause. The approval comes early. The consequences arrive later. This delay is what makes the pattern durable. People adapt to narrowing conditions by calling them maturity. They mistake endurance for progress and consistency for growth. At this stage, the episode introduces a foundational framework built around 3 simple principles. They are not introduced as revolutionary insights. They are introduced as stabilizers. The first is avoiding unnecessary debt, especially consumer debt. Debt is described as a future claim on time, energy, and attention. It is not framed as immoral or forbidden, but is heavy. Carrying it requires constant output, leaving less room for choice. The second principle is living on less than one earns. This is not framed as deprivation, it is framed as margin creation. Margin is what absorbs shocks, allows patience, and enables decisions without urgency. The episode emphasizes that margin is not a personality trait, it is a structural condition. Without it, even intelligent decisions become reactive. The third principle is investing the surplus. This is not presented as speculation or excitement. It is presented as consistency. Investing is framed as allowing capital to work without constant interference. The episode explains that wealth accumulation is less about prediction and more about restraint. Most long-term strategies fail, not because they are flawed, but because people abandon them during discomfort. The episode then addresses income directly. It challenges the assumption that earning more automatically resolves these issues. It explains that higher income often intensifies them by expanding expectations. Bigger houses, better neighborhoods, and more visible lifestyles increase fixed costs alongside earnings. The cage becomes more comfortable, but also harder to leave. In contrast, people with modest incomes often retain an advantage they do not recognize: fewer expectations and lower fixed commitments. This makes margin easier to protect. Throughout this section, the episode avoids moral judgment. It does not criticize ambition or success. It simply clarifies that income does not equal freedom. Freedom is measured by how much of the future remains undecided. A person can earn a great deal and still have every decision pre-spoken for. Another can earn less and retain wide latitude in how they live. As the episode closes this first movement, it reframes failure itself. It suggests that most people do not fail financially through recklessness or ignorance. They fail through compliance. They follow instructions that prioritize stability over agency and consistency over adaptability. The loss is gradual, which is why it feels normal. This opening section establishes the core tension of the episode. It is not about rejecting ownership, effort, or responsibility. It is about recognizing the trade between obligation and choice before it becomes permanent. The episode does not ask listeners to undo the past. It asks them to see the structure they are standing inside. Awareness, it argues, is the only prerequisite for different outcomes. Once the trade is visible, repeating it unconsciously becomes far more difficult. The second movement of the episode widens the lens and begins examining why so many people remain stuck, even after they appear to be doing everything right. It challenges the assumption that effort naturally leads to freedom, and instead introduces a more unsettling idea: that people can work harder, earn more, and still lose ground if their decisions are structured incorrectly. The problem, the episode argues, is not discipline or ambition, it is allocation. Here the episode turns its attention to income, a subject most financial conversations treat as the ultimate solution. It acknowledges that increasing income can relieve immediate pressure, but it insists that income alone does not create independence. In many cases, it does the opposite. As income rises, expectations expand. Larger homes become normalized. Better neighborhoods become assumed. Private schools, newer cars, and visible markers of success quietly shift from luxuries into obligations. Each upgrade feels earned, even necessary, yet each one absorbs margin that once created flexibility. The episode explains that this is why high earners often feel more trapped than those with modest means. Their lifestyles carry heavier fixed costs, leaving little room to pause, pivot, or take risk. Decisions that might once have been simple now require justification, coordination, and reassurance. The future becomes increasingly scripted, not by lack of opportunity, but by accumulated commitments. This is not framed as hypocrisy or failure, it is framed as gravity. The more weight someone carries, the harder it becomes to change direction.
From there, the episode reframes investing itself, stripping it of urgency and drama. It argues that modern culture has transformed investing into a spectacle of constant movement, prediction, and opinion. News cycles amplify volatility. Social media rewards bold claims and fast gains. In this environment, stillness looks like ignorance. Yet the episode insists that stillness is often the advantage. Wealth, it explains, is rarely built by constant action. It is built by resisting the urge to act. The episode emphasizes that markets fluctuate by design. Volatility is not a flaw to be corrected, but a condition to be endured. The danger does not lie in downturns, but in emotional reaction to them. Panic converts temporary decline into permanent loss. Overconfidence converts temporary success into irreversible mistakes. The episode suggests that the greatest threat to long-term growth is not market behavior, but human behavior in response to it. At this point, the episode introduces compounding not as a mathematical trick, but as a psychological test. Compounding rewards patience disproportionately, which is why it feels underwhelming at first. Progress appears flat. Results feel delayed. Many abandon the process before the curve bends upward. The episode argues that this invisibility is what protects compounding from exploitation. Those who remain patient are rewarded precisely because most people cannot tolerate waiting without reassurance. The episode then returns to the idea of independence and reframes it again. Independence is not described as a finish line marked by a specific number. It is described as optionality accumulating over time, the ability to leave a bad job, the ability to absorb an unexpected expense without panic, the ability to pause without fear of collapse. These outcomes arrive long before full independence, yet they are rarely celebrated because they lack spectacle. The episode suggests that this quiet progress is misunderstood because it does not resemble success as culture defines it. From here, the episode introduces an emotional dimension often excluded from financial discussion. It acknowledges that money decisions are rarely neutral. Many people spend not to acquire objects, but to regulate feeling. Purchases provide short bursts of validation, reassurance, or identity. The episode treats this pattern with empathy, recognizing it as a response to insecurity rather than irresponsibility. It explains how spending becomes a way to feel successful, even when the underlying anxiety remains unresolved. This is why the episode argues that financial independence cannot be achieved solely through strategy. It requires separating identity from consumption. As long as self-worth is tied to visible markers, money will be used to perform rather than protect. In contrast, those who need less gain leverage quietly. Needing less reduces pressure. Reduced pressure expands choice. This chain reaction is rarely discussed because it contradicts the narrative that more is always better. The episode introduces the concept of freedom money as a gradual accumulation rather than a sudden event. It describes how even small reserves change posture. The first savings do not create wealth, but they create breathing room. Breathing room alters decision-making. With margin, urgency decreases. With urgency reduced, mistakes become less frequent. The episode emphasizes that this shift is cumulative. Each small buffer compounds psychologically before it compounds financially. The discussion then turns to time, not as a resource, but as perception. The episode explains that people struggle to protect their future selves because the future feels abstract. Tomorrow feels real. 10 years from now feels hypothetical. This disconnect causes people to prioritize immediate comfort over long-term benefit, not because they are careless, but because the brain treats the future like a stranger. The episode suggests that effective systems must account for this limitation rather than rely on willpower alone. In addressing this, the episode returns to consistency.
It argues that systems outperform intentions because they remove repeated decision-making. Automatic investing, limited lifestyle inflation, and clear boundaries reduce the need for constant self-control. Over time, this structure creates a compounding effect that is both financial and emotional. Stability emerges not from force, but from reduced friction. As this second movement nears its conclusion, the episode re-examines the idea of success one more time. It proposes that success is not best measured by visible milestones, but by how much pressure has been removed from daily life. A person may appear accomplished while carrying immense internal strain. Another may appear modest while possessing wide freedom of movement. The difference lies not in ambition, but in the architecture of their decisions. The episode does not romanticize minimalism or poverty. It does not suggest that ambition is a flaw or comfort a mistake. Instead, it emphasizes proportionality. When obligations outpace flexibility, life narrows. When flexibility is protected, life expands. This balance, the episode argues, is what most people miss while chasing symbols of progress. By the end of this section, the episode has shifted the listener's understanding of wealth away from accumulation and toward orientation. Money is no longer framed as a reward or a score. It is framed as a directional force. It pushes life somewhere. The question is whether that direction is chosen deliberately or inherited unconsciously through expectation and habit. This second part reinforces the episode's central tension. Freedom is rarely lost through dramatic failure. It is traded gradually for reassurance, approval, and familiarity. Once that trade is recognized, repeating it without thought becomes difficult. Awareness interrupts momentum. An interruption, the episode suggests, is where real agency begins.